going on, you outdoor mavericks? Welcome back to the channel. Now today's video is going to be about spring crabbing tips for the Oregon coast. Now typically, the fall and winter are the best months to go crabbing along the Oregon coast. However, there's still plenty of Dungeness crabs around for you to catch in the springtime. And any chance I can be out there crabbing in the springtime, I am definitely going. And I love spring crabbing along the Oregon coast because there's less people out on the water, the crabs are a little bit less aggressive, or at least there's less band-aids being applied to my fingers, and I also learn additional tips and techniques to help me catch an additional crab or two whenever I hit the water. So if you're looking to do some spring Oregon coast crabbing, or you're looking for some tips to help you catch more Dungeness crabs, then I got the top 5 spring Oregon coast crabbing tips just for you. Now, one of the keys to success for crabbing along the Oregon coast is having the right bait and the right amount of bait. And in the springtime in particular, you gotta make sure you have enough bait to get after the crabs because it might take you a little while to find some keepers. So tip number 5 for spring Oregon coast crabbing is to bring additional bait with you. Now, my favorite bait for Oregon coast crabbing is chicken drumsticks. And the reason that I love chicken is there's plenty of bait on the chicken, and it's one of the baits that sea lions won't go after. But in the springtime, when there's less crabs around, you might have to go through additional bait in order to get on and find the keeper-sized crabs. For fall crabbing along the Oregon coast, I typically take 2 packages of drumsticks with me and a few fish heads just in case. But in the wintertime, I'll even go to 3 or 4 packets of drumsticks because those crabs will go through the chicken really quickly, even putting in 3 drumsticks in each bait box in each crab pot. Now, depending on the water conditions and where you're crabbing, you might have to move your pots around to find the crabs. And if you're in areas that have smaller crabs or female crabs, they're gonna go crazy for the chicken as well. So you might have to use some extra bait to go find the crabs that you're looking for, the keeper crabs. Now, one of the worst feelings crabbing is going out on the water and realizing that you've just run out of bait after an hour of crabbing because the crabs are plentiful, maybe not the size that you want, but they're chewing through the bait really quickly. So if you're going out crabbing in the springtime, definitely ensure that you've got extra bait with you on the boat, whether it's chicken, whether it's fish heads, maybe some duck legs, some pheasant legs, some mink, or maybe even some tuna. But most of all, make sure that you've got extra bait with you because you also might want to swap out and change other baits if they're not working. And if you definitely see sea lions around, definitely stick with the chicken because the second that you put in fish carcasses or tuna or other smelly fish, they're going to try to break in and go after your crab pots and gear, and that's how you get your stuff ruined. Pay attention and bring extra bait with you because you might have to go through a lot to get that half dozen or even a dozen keepers on the boat. Now, when it comes to crabbing, especially in the bays along the Oregon coast, those incoming tides will flush in fresh seawater and bring those crabs in from the ocean into the bay. So my number 4 tip is to always crab the incoming tide and crab it as long as possible. Now, how soon do you start putting in your crab pots as the tide is coming in and coming into high tide and flushing that seawater into the bay? My typical rule of thumb is about an hour and a half to 2 hours before you get into that high tide situation to be able to get those fresh crabs when they're coming in on the incoming tide. And depending on where you're crabbing, you want to ensure that you're moving your pots around to get after the keeper crabs. If you got a pot and you find a couple keepers there, keep your pots there. But if you got your crabbing gear and traps in shallower water or areas where you're just not getting a lot of crabs, move them into deeper waters in different sections of the bay. You gotta play around with moving your traps around and go to find the crab. On those incoming tides, especially big swings, those crabs will get flushed in and they'll be moving around looking for food. So what you want to do is keep moving around and keep finding those little pockets where the big keeper crabs are hanging out, and then make sure you drop your gear right on them. And a word of caution, be really careful about the outgoing tide that's going out of the bay. Throughout the Oregon coast in 2020 and into 2021, there's been more accidents in sea and people that have drowned and died because they got swooped into an outgoing tide going out of the bay because they got caught up crabbing or in the wrong vessel or boat, or got flipped over because that big tide swing and that push of water out of the bay out back into the ocean swept them up. So if you're gonna go crabbing and you got big tide swings and you think you're gonna crab a little bit of that outgoing tide, and be very cognizant of the water conditions and the weather conditions and just be safe. If you think there's something is gonna be risky, don't risk it. Now here in the state of Oregon, the keeper-sized Dungeness crab is 5 3/4, and you can only keep males. So my number 3 tip is if you have crabbing pots and crabbing traps that have a lot of female crabs in them, grab your gear and move it to somewhere else. What you'll find year-round, but also in the springtime, is the female crabs will hang out together. So if you got your crab pots and your crab gear and you're pulling up a lot of female crabs, that most definitely means that the males are not in that area of the bay or where you're crabbing. So you need to immediately pick up your pots or pick up your traps and move them to a different area in the bay or wherever you're crabbing. Now a quick bait tip and something that I've learned from a lot of old timers and guys that have crabbed a long time. There's a sort of myth, but something to it, that if you put broken up clams or smashed up clams in your bait container within your crab pot or crab trap or ring, that'll deter and keep the female crabs away from your gear, and it'll attract the males a little bit more. So if you're crabbing in areas and there's a lot of female crabs around, you might give the clams a try as something to put in the bait box. So if you're struggling and getting a lot of female crabs, pick up your gear and move it, but also maybe add some clams or broken up clams into the bait box and give that a try and see if that'll help you attract more big male Dungeness crabs. Now when it comes to curing or brining baits, I typically think of brining herring for spring Chinook fishing or curing eggs for fall coho and Chinook fishing, and even a little bit of steelhead fishing. But when it comes to crabbing, don't overlook brining your baits to give you a little bit more of an edge to attract the big crabs. So my number 2 spring Oregon Coast crabbing tip is to brine your baits. Now when I'm talking about brining baits, I typically brine my chicken the most. And the way that I like to do that is to take it right out of the package, right from the store. Don't freeze it or don't use frozen chicken, but use the fresh stuff right out of the store, especially the discounted chicken that maybe is on sale or near its expiration. Now my favorite way to brine chicken for crabbing is to add some of this Procure attractant into a Ziploc bag in with the chicken and mix it around about an hour before we're about to hit the water for some crabbing. And then every time I bring up the crab pot, I'll shake a little bit of this up, dab a little bit in the bait box on the chicken before deploying back the trap or the ring into the water. And what I found with this Procure brine is on slow days, this will help you get a few extra crabs that you might not think that you're gonna get. But also it's gonna attract a lot more crabs, which means you may have to go through additional bait, which is not a problem as long as you got enough. And I just like brining my chicken for my crabbing bait because it gives me a little bit more of an edge, and I just found we've been a little bit more successful, especially on tough spring days when there's not a lot of crabs around. You know, going from a 5 crab day to a 9 crab day because of a little bit of attractant, I'll take that any day of the week. And so if you're gonna go out for some spring crabbing, consider brining your chicken with some of this Procure attractant. Give it a try, shake it in there. You don't need to use a lot, but I'm gonna tell you, it's gonna help you catch more crabs in the long haul. And now for the number 1 spring crabbing tip. As somebody who goes fishing, hunting, and crabbing a lot, having really good and up-to-date reports can sometimes be the key to success when you're headed out into the outdoors. And when it comes to crabbing, my number 1 tip is to ask the locals. Get local reports on how the crabbing is doing, where people are crabbing, what are they using to help get some intel to help you catch crabs. And asking the locals can come in a couple different forms. One, you could be asking local people who are at the boat launch, you're out on the water, how things are going, what they're using, and see where other people are crabbing in the bays or in the water. Another way is to call ahead, call the local bait shop, call the local place that cooks the crabs. How's it been? How many are people catching? Where are they catching them at? How are the water conditions? Just being friendly and asking people for some information is a big deal. And sometimes just that additional information, or it's one piece of information, is gonna help you catch more crabs. For example, if somebody says, hey, along the road here, they've been catching a lot of females and it has been very good for keepers, that gives me the sign that we shouldn't go there, but we should move out into another area in the bay. Even just that one simple tip about where not to crab could help us during the day and go find new areas to go catch the keepers and the male crabs. So before you head out to the water, or when you get to the water, ask the locals, be friendly, find out information, get some tips on where the best crabbing is, how the crabbing's going, the best baits that are being used, maybe which locations are good, and how the ocean and water conditions are, because those things will help you come up with a game plan and figure out where you're gonna go and how you're gonna get after the crabs. And hopefully, because of that information, you have a really successful day out on the water. Alright guys, and that's my top 5 spring crabbing tips for the Oregon coast. I hope you guys got some information and tips out of today's video. And like I said, typically the best crabbing of the year is September through December, but there's still plenty of Dungeness crab crabs around in the springtime. So use these tips, get out there on the water and do some crabbing. I've had some epic days where we've had 3 people in the boat and got 30 crabs in a day. In fact, in a couple hours. There's definitely crabs around. So if you got the time and can handle some of that crazy Oregon coast weather, get out there and go catch some Dungeness crabs. So hit that like button, subscribe if you love crabbing tips and other crabbing and outdoor content. And don't forget guys, and as always, the outdoors is a gift, share it with others.